In a small, quiet town, nestled among rolling hills and tall ancient trees, there lived a man named Robert. Robert was an ordinary man, by most accounts, living a life filled with the usual ups and downs that come with being human. He had a family he loved, a job he worked hard at, and friends with whom he shared his joys and his sorrows. But deep within, Robert often felt a lingering sense of unease, a gnawing feeling that something was missing from his life, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Robert's days were filled with the constant chatter of his mind, from the moment he woke up in the morning to the moment he fell asleep at night. His thoughts raced. They raced about the past, the future, and really everything in between. He worried about his family, his job, his health, and sometimes he even worried about his worries. It was as if there was a little voice inside his head, constantly talking, constantly judging, constantly analyzing everything he did and everything that happened to him. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day at work, Robert found himself sitting alone in his living room. The house was quiet, the only sound the ticking of the old grandfather clock way over in the corner. As he sat there, staring blankly at the wall, he noticed something strange. Amidst the usual chatter of his mind, he became aware of a quieter voice, a voice that seemed to be watching all of his thoughts and his emotions from a distance. It wasn't judging or analyzing, just observing. Now this realization startled Robert. What is this voice, he thought? Is this just another thought, or is it something else? The more he focused on this quiet voice, the more he realized that it was different from the usual noise in his head. It was calm, peaceful, and detached. It seemed to be watching everything from a distance, without getting caught up in the drama of his everyday thoughts and emotions. It was as if there was a part of him that was always observing, always present, but never really involved in the hustle and bustle of his mind. Intrigued by this discovery, Robert began to pay more attention to this quiet voice. He started meditating every morning, sitting in silence and simply observing his thoughts without getting involved in them. At first, it was very difficult. His mind was like a wild horse, constantly running from one thought to another. But with time and practice, he began to notice a subtle shift. The more he meditated, the more he became aware of the silent observer that lied within him. The part of him that was always watching, always present. So as the days turned into weeks, Robert's awareness of this inner witness grew stronger and stronger. He began to realize that this quiet voice wasn't just a thought or a feeling. It was something much deeper. It was as if he was peeling away layers of himself, layers of thoughts, emotions, and memories, to reveal something pure, untouched at the core of his being. One day, during a particularly deep meditation, Robert had a profound realization. He was not his thoughts. He was not his emotions. He wasn't even his own body. All these things were just experiences that came and went, like clouds passing through the sky. But the sky itself, the vast, open, clear sky, that was his true self. The silent witness, the quiet observer that he had discovered within himself, was his true essence, his true identity. This realization was both liberating and unsettling. On one hand, it brought Robert a deep sense of peace. He felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off of his shoulders, as if he had been freed from the constant worries and anxieties that had plagued him for so long. And on the other hand, it was unsettling to realize that the person he had always thought he was, Robert, the man with a family, a job, and a life full of experiences, was not his true self. As Robert continued his journey of self-discovery, he began to see his life from a completely new perspective. He realized that the Robert he had always identified with was just a character in a play, a role he had been playing his whole life. This character was made up of all of his thoughts, emotions, and experiences that had shaped him over the years, but it was not who he truly was. This realization was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it brought Robert a deep sense of freedom. He no longer felt as if he had to live up to expectations and judgments of his ego. He no longer felt as if he had to be a certain way or achieve certain things to be happy. He could simply be, without the need to constantly prove himself to others. And on the other hand, it also brought a sense of disillusionment. The life he had always thought was so important, the struggles and triumphs he had invested so much energy in, suddenly all seemed so insignificant. It was as if he had been playing a game all his life, a game that didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But as Robert continued to meditate and deepen his understanding of the silent witness within him, he began to see that his disillusionment was not something to fear. It was simply a part of the process of waking up, of seeing through the illusion of the ego, and realizing the truth of who he truly was. He began to let go of attachments and desires that had once driven him. He no longer felt the need to be someone or achieve something to be happy. Instead, he found happiness in simply being, in simply witnessing the play of life without getting caught up in it. As Robert's understanding of his true self deepened, he began to practice being present in every single moment. He realized that the silent witness, the quiet observer within him, was always present, always aware, no matter what was happening in his life. Whether he was at work, at home with his family, or alone in meditation, the silent witness was always there, watching, observing, and simply being, The practice of presence brought a deep sense of peace and contentment to Robert's life. He no longer felt as if he was constantly chasing after something or running away from something. He no longer felt as if he had to do anything or be anything to be happy. He could simply be, and that was enough. Robert's relationships with others also began to change. He no longer felt the need to judge or control others, to make them fit into his idea of how they should be. Instead, he simply accepted them as they were, without trying to change them. This acceptance brought a new level of intimacy and connection to all of his relationships, as he was no longer trying to impose his ego on anyone. He also found that his relationship with himself changed. He no longer judged or criticized himself for his thoughts, his emotions, or even his actions. He simply observed them without getting caught up in them. This brought a new level of self-compassion and understanding, as he realized that his true self was not defined by his thoughts or actions, but by the silent witness within him. As Robert continued to live from the perspective of the silent witness, he found that his suffering began to diminish. He no longer felt the intense emotional highs and lows that had once characterized his life. Instead, he felt a deep sense of inner peace and stability, no matter what was happening around him. He realized that his suffering had always come from his attachment to his thoughts and emotions, from his identification with the character of Robert. But now that he had disidentified from his ego and connected with his true self, the silent witness, he no longer felt the same level of attachment or identification with his thoughts and emotions. He could simply observe them without getting caught up in them, and this brought a profound sense of liberation. Robert also found that his desires and fears began to lose their grip on him. He no longer felt the need to constantly strive for more or avoid what he feared. Instead, he could simply accept whatever came his way, knowing that it was all part of the play of life, and that his true self, the silent witness, was untouched by it all. This liberation from suffering brought a new sense of joy and freedom to Robert's life. He no longer felt weighted down by the burdens of his past or the anxieties of the future. He could simply be in the present moment and find happiness and contentment in the simple act of being. As Robert continued to live from the perspective of the silent witness, he began to integrate this understanding into every aspect of his life. He realized that the silent witness was not separate from his everyday experiences, but was actually the foundation of everything he did. He found that he could be fully engaged in his work, his relationships, and his daily activities, while still maintaining his connection with the silent witness within. He could experience the joys and sorrows of life without getting lost in them, because he knew that his true self was the silent witness, always present and always aware. This integration of the witness into his everyday life brought a new sense of wholeness and completeness to Robert's life. He no longer felt as if he was living two separate lives, one as the silent witness and one as the character of Robert. Instead, he saw that the silent witness and the character of Robert were two sides of the same coin, two aspects of his true self. He could still play the role of Robert with all its thoughts, emotions, and experiences, but he no longer identified with it. He knew that his true self was the silent witness, the pure awareness that observed everything without getting caught up in it. This understanding brought a deep sense of freedom and peace to Robert's life. He no longer felt bound by the limitations of his ego. As Robert grew older, his understanding of the silent witness deepened even further. He realized that the silent witness was not just his true self, but was actually the true self of all beings. It was the pure consciousness that underlies all of existence, the eternal witness that observes the play of life in all of its forms. This realization brought Robert a deep sense of connection with all beings. He no longer saw himself as separate from others, but as a part of the same universal consciousness. He could see the silent witness in everyone he met, and this brought a new level of compassion and understanding to his relationships. He also realized that the silent witness was eternal, beyond birth and death, beyond time and space. It was the pure awareness that had always been there and would always be there, watching the play of life unfold. This understanding brought Robert a deep sense of peace as he faced the challenges of aging and the inevitability of death. He knew that his true self, the silent witness, was always untouched by the changes of the body and mind. It was the eternal observer, the pure consciousness that would continue to witness the play of life, even after the character of Robert had passed away. So as Robert neared the end of his life, he felt a deep sense of contentment and fulfillment. He had found the true essence of who he was, beyond the thoughts, emotions, and experiences that had once defined him. He had discovered the silent witness within, the eternal observer that watched the play of life without getting caught up in it. And as he took his final breath, Robert felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he was not his body, not his mind, not even the character of Robert, but the eternal witness, the pure consciousness that would continue to observe the play of life, beyond time and space, beyond birth and death. After Robert's passing, those who knew him remembered him as a man of great peace and wisdom. They spoke of his calm presence, his gentle compassion, and his deep understanding of life. But what they remembered most was the sense of freedom and joy that seemed to radiate from him. A freedom that came from his deep connection from the silent witness within. Robert's legacy lived on, not just in the memories of those who knew him, but in the lives of those who were inspired by his teachings. The understanding of the silent witness, the pure consciousness that lies at the heart of all beings, continued to spread, bringing peace and freedom to all who embraced it. Good night and namaste.